Okay, fantastic. Welcome. We're going to start our panel here in a few seconds, and I believe Dr. Hillary Kahn is going to introduce our marvelous panelists. And I'm Jess Alana, I run the grad group, so if you have any questions, just write a comment and we'll get to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. This is not our last, is this our last event?
Of the semester.
It is our last event for the Global Studies grad group. And I know some of you have attended some of these events before, and some of you might be new, so welcome. The Global Studies grad group overall is grad run, grad student defined, and the goal is to serve the needs, whatever they may be, of graduate students pursuing global research or not across the campus. It's hosted by the Center for the Study of Global Change, and we're just very, very proud to administer it. My name is Hillary Kahn. I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Global Change. And today we have a really interesting group of people who's going to initiate some conversation and host what you might be able to contribute to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It's so nice to see so many people here at lunchtime. So just briefly, the questions that we were asked to address. So I'm here, and I have some notes to myself so I can keep on task. I'm here in two capacities, one as the director of the Graduate Mentoring Center and the other as faculty in AAADS. And so at the center, we see a number of students in particular who come when they are at the burnout stage, and part of our mission actually is to help people come to us before they reach the burnout stage. That's really, really important in how we are designed and the activities that we provide, and around the tenets that we have in terms of balance being the first thing, community, culture, mentorship, and scholarship. So a very contemplative approach. We actually call it the fivefold path. These are the things that can actually help you be successful. This morning at our mentoring cohort meeting, in fact, we discussed how to plan our summers. And one of the things that I suggested was that after the semester ends, to build in a 1 to 2 week rest period. And I do mean rest. And before the semester begins, to build in a rest period. In my capacity as a faculty member in AAADS, because I teach the courses on memory, trauma, and healing, most of my teaching is geared around things such as slavery and genocide and violence, right? Historically and more currently. So again, how do we, particularly if you are AIing or you're doing that kind of work and you are teaching on a range of topics, how do you work with that? Because that can provide burnout as well. I actually build in rest and sleep into my classroom as part of a contemplative practice. Again, so you're going to hear a theme from me around this topic and rest. And so I have to say, thinking of the earlier conversation, I rarely suffer from burnout. Burnout, that case where you don't care, you care even less today about what you didn't care about yesterday, today. Where you may be finding yourself cynical, where you may find yourself perhaps feeling like you're depressed, where you're only satisfied if you are sitting on a couch watching your favorite reruns or eating your favorite food, or where you can't engage with anyone at all, where you're not seeing the end of what it is that you are engaging in or the possibilities of anything, right? There are multiple ranges of things in how you may experience burnout. But part of the reason, and again, getting graduate students to the center before they experience this has to do with community. Like, what are the rituals that I actually have in place on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, for me to actually recognize when I may be getting to that point? So my question is always to someone, can you help me? And you young does this, right? Enrique, can you help me not to fall into the hole, right? I don't want you to help me out of the hole. I want you to help me before I fall into the hole, right? So what are the rituals and strategies that we have in place in our lives? And I have some very direct ones that help me avoid that. So I'll stop there.
So my name is Suriyahan, as introduced, and I'm doing my 6th year PhD here in Spirit Education in Indiana University. And just for a little information, I think I was invited not as a graduate assistant for the Graduate Mentoring Center, but because as a friends of Solana, because we are meeting regularly, like weekly basis, to write together, and sometimes we talk a lot about emotions and feelings about writing dissertation, because you know it can be very emotional, and most of the time it can be very individual and isolated at this stage. And I realized that it's finding those communities that you can share and you can talk about those feelings are really important. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk about this kind of emotions, feelings about burnout. And just a little of my research information. I completed my data collection last summer, so I'm dissertating for about a year by now. And I took like about 9 months to collect data back in South Korea, which is my home country. That involves like 3 times of international travels to back home. And that was very exhausting. And that was the moment I experienced burnout very badly immediately after I'm done with my data collection. So I think I can touch on those kind of experiences, because every grad student, every doctoral student has experienced burnout different ways, and I'm here to just share those few of those examples, and I would love to hear about your experiences and challenges too.
I think a lot of my work overlaps with Maria's. And that there are so many things we talk about when I meet with students individually, when we talk about that sort of fall from burnout. Sort of like you were saying, it's not like an elevator. I think we often think of it as an elevator. You know, one day we're burnt out. Where more realistically, it is a path to burning out, and the next day we care a little bit less. And we talk about those tools with a lot of students. And one thing I hear a lot, and I think it's grounded in some of our cultural expectations of doing more, being able to take on more responsibility, that when we talk about these things, about these rituals or ways to de-stress, people kind of brush them off and say, well, that's not for me yet. And we wait until we're fully burnt out, whatever that looks like, and we've crossed this threshold where it almost seems like no return. And then that's when I meet people. I don't meet people in the process, it's very rarely. And so I don't think it's any coincidence that our caseloads go up right around October, right around midterms. And then so you figure from October to November to December, we are solid. And of course, naturally, at the beginning of the semester, things are quiet again. And sure enough, right around spring break, it happens again. And I think that goes to say a lot of things, but particularly that I think we can do a lot to manage burnout, and that it looks like a lot of different things. And I always believe that getting ahead of it can be helpful, but that's not to say that coming in the back end doesn't help either. So hopefully I'm here to provide a little insight into that.
Great. So thank you. A few comments just quickly before I ask you to really talk about some of those resources and tips and tools that you utilize to prevent yourself from even falling into the hole. I one time was told as a graduate student that I was in a vortex. Actually, my mentor told me I was in a vortex. And I'm just sitting here listening, I'm like, yes, I was there. So anyways, I'm just really looking forward to hearing your comments. And so I also just realized that I failed to thank all our sponsors and to people. Actually, I just have to, before we continue, I have to thank Jess Alana Stewart, who has been the guiding force for the global grad group for quite a bit of time. And so thank you, Jess Alana, for pulling this off. And then also the co-sponsor and participant is the Institute for Advanced Studies. Thank you very, very much for their support as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit, again, we don't have to keep going linearly if you want. Perhaps we could start in the middle and then go to either side. Talk us a little bit about some of the resources and tools that you utilize when you encounter burnout or to avoid burnout.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not trying to say my strategies were the useful ones. So the first thing I did was like, okay, I put that project aside and I didn't look back for a while because I felt like I just need to take a break from that project, which drained my energy, physical energy, and also emotional energy.
Yeah.
And at one point during my graduate program, I also had a chance to talk to Center for Human Growth in School Education, which is not unusual. I mean, I know many of my friends who are in grad school are looking for those counselings at CAPS and also Center for Human Growth. And those are helpful, but the resources always have a chance to talk to someone else. Like I've been working with Interdisciplinary for years by now, and I've always talked to her about the challenges and emotions, and I learned from her about how to manage those feelings through contemplative practices. Also attending those related conferences and professional development of opportunities. But after I completed my coursework, I didn't go back to school of education unless I had meetings. And I think those are the things that I could do something before I encounter those important critical moments. Maybe I had to talk to my friends, like my cohort members who started my programs with me or in similar stages of dissertating or proposal, whatever stages you're in, to talk about those processes more. Although I'm the person who really needs personal time to recover, so I tend to stay at home or in my cubicle or in my office, wherever it is. But at this point, I realize having those opportunities to talk is really, really important. That's why I go to grad groups here at Center for Study of Global Change, and I also go to writing groups that the Graduate Mentoring Center offers every week. And I also do the dissertation writing group, which is a mixture of all different grad students who are in dissertation writing stages. And you will hear every different feelings like every week. And it's okay to talk about those kind of feelings. And you're not the only one who are experiencing those burnouts every different ways. So that's one resources that I can recommend, finding your community or just drop in one of those available writing groups on campus, because sometimes you just want to talk to a stranger about your feelings, and it doesn't have to be your friends. Sometimes it's just more effective to talk to like a counselor.
Enrique?
Yeah, I really love the phrase contemplative practice, and I feel like I might have to steal it, so thank you guys. So you guys know, as a counselor, I'm not immune to burnout. It happens to me too. Yeah, I don't think that should be any surprise to anybody. I think we're all prone to it, and I think it depends on what steps and measures we take that can prevent that or minimize that from happening. For myself, and I want to share this metaphor because I think this can be helpful, just a way to maybe conceptualize what it is I mean. In Christopher Nolan's Inception, if any of you have ever seen it, great movie. If you haven't, go to the library right after this and go find it. They talk about this idea of a totem, and a totem is an item that's personalized to each person, to each character in the movie, and only they know the weight of it, only they know the shape of it, only they know the feel of it, and it's what they use to ground themselves after a dream to recognize, yes, I am still either in a dream or I am out of it. I think in some ways we can approach these same practices as a ways of doing just that, of checking in, am I present, am I here, or am I somewhere else? So I think of routine, I think of things that can promote that. So for me, it's been volleyball. I was never a big volleyball guy, and I've joined volleyball leagues here, and I find it so fun, and not only fun, but something to look forward to, so that I know even on the tough days, I still have something motivating me, something to talk about the next day, something to reflect on, something that is very contemplative for me. I played a lot of sports growing up. Another thing I've done since moving out here has been trivia. Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can find me there. And again, what it is more than just trivia. It's an opportunity to sit down with peers. It's an opportunity to separate myself from the things I'm doing, because I don't always need to be a counselor in my office. Once I leave, hopefully I can leave some of those things behind. And I think when it comes to research, I think what can happen is that we sit with these different reactions we're having to things and then carry them with us. And sure, should we reflect on them? Absolutely. Should they dictate our next week? I'm a little more reluctant to say yeah. And I think creating some space, and especially through routine, that we can get in the habit of what happens neurologically too is understanding like, hey, I am not in that place. I'm not in that space. What am I doing now? I'm being more sort of contemplative or meditative in that. So those are mine.
That's amazing.
So I knew this would happen, and that would be that if we were going to talk about this subject, a number of the things that I had, for my notes to talk about, that we would talk about those as a whole. So putting things aside, for example, I'm trained as a poet and a creative scholar. That's my work. So I collaborate, and our training is as poets and creative writers, art makers, is to make the thing. I tell people it could take me a year to write a poem. Now, if I'm writing a poem a day, which I've done before, that's really marvelous, but that poem a day at the end of the day or at the end of the 30 days is still not necessarily a poem, right? I may need to come back to it in several months or a year. If I'm working on a manuscript, it may be several years before we actually get that done. And so thinking about this rush, push through that we are really asked to do in this particular society, we work counter to that. And so it's really important. So just thinking about when we are working on something or we're beginning to feel a particular way that puts us outside of what we think is our regular self, whatever that may be, and how we identify that, that's the time to stop. And that's the time to check in with a friend, with your mentor, with an advisor, even anyone. It's really important. The thing that I get asked to do most on campus by groups, undergraduate, faculty, and graduate groups, is around midterms and finals, is to host a sitting meditation or some type of meditation. So we do that several times a year. Contemplative practices is a term that's used to cover a wide variety of practices, everything from walking, pilgrimages, journaling, yoga, any number of things. And if you go to CMind, C-M-I-N-D, just Google CMind contemplative practices, on that site, they actually have a link to a contemplative practices tree that was developed. This is a part of an organization for the Association for Contemplative Mind and Higher Education, for all of us who practice contemplative practices and bring those into our classroom. There is an area of research in contemplative pedagogy, hence why sleeping is part of the work that I do, or resting, because you can't think, right? You can't think. By the time you've reached the burnout stage, your brain is not functioning in a way that is allowing you to either think or to help your body move. Your body is in a stage of just not even relaxing. It's tense all the time, right? So, and just finding ways to incorporate, even if it's only 5 minutes. I usually travel with one of my singing bowls or a set of tinctures around campus for meetings, even if that's with deans or associate deans of faculty, to help us learn how to create, again, those strategies and tools, right? To build into our lives it's a practice on how to be well. It's a practice on setting boundaries. So I have some very deliberate and firm boundaries, and I'm very clear to people about what those boundaries are in terms of my meeting times and what I do. Does that mean sometimes that I don't break them? No. If you call me and there's an emergency during that time, I'll be there. That's not the point. The point is on a regular basis that whatever boundaries you have established for yourself, that you try to hold to those boundaries, and you have people who can help you stick to those boundaries, so that if you have a certain amount of time that's blocked out on your day, then particularly with Outlook, you need to block it out on your day, right? I worked for a woman from whom I learned, this, for 12 years, and she had a particular activity that she did for herself. We knew never to schedule anything during that time once a week. It was how she took care of herself, right? And so that's really important. The other thing that I heard was isolation, right? You're not alone, right, in doing this, but it's also not to be isolated, right? So there is a reason why balance and community, although they alphabetically fit in the 5 tenets, is the first thing there, but why they are first is that it's very difficult. I did my graduate work here at IU, so have an understanding of the culture here, and it's very difficult sometimes to not be isolated. It's also difficult to know where and how to form community, right? And so forming that community, sometimes you have to take a risk to reach out, and this is where the mentoring part comes in, and it could be a peer-to-peer mentoring. What you sometimes have to do is to give someone, like my sister Salar artist, spiritual community friends have permission to say, hey, how are you doing today? Hey, I noticed that whatever it is, are you okay? We have permission to do that for each other. And so it's important to understand the people you can give permission to, even as, hey, have you eaten today? Have you slept today? Right? To do that as a way. And so we have commitments to each other from all across the country as part of this community that is responsible for our well-being. And it seems like it's frou-frou, but I want to remind you all that in this country, the self-care, self-help, take care of your business industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Our job is to assist graduate students and faculty and staff, not to participate in that industry, because sometimes you need to luxuriate, right? That's it, right? But to develop strategies early on, so it does not begin to become a crutch that you have to run here, you have to run here, that you can only do this at a luxury spa. You can do it in your closet at home, trust me, right? So just some initial things.
So really interesting, all of your initial comments. I might want to get back to the idea of boundaries. I think boundaries is something that in higher education generally is part of the burnout phenomenon, that it's just when those boundaries are more at the lack thereof, just becomes too porous, and I think you can lose yourself. So I really appreciate that. What exactly, I mean, you've already given some. What other, though, can I just step back for a second? I'm sitting here trying to figure out burnout. What do we really mean by burnout? What is, and perhaps, I know this wasn't one of your questions, so I'm sorry, I hope I'm not pushing you to ad-lib too much, but when, what does that mean to you? What is actually burnout? Like the actual, the concept, the actual, physicality, socially, emotionally, materially, what does that look like to you? What is burnout?
For me, I go back and I think my training for this, and it's funny because I was talking to somebody about this just yesterday, and I told them, I'd be in serious trouble if I wasn't a counselor and I didn't have the training that I have that was intended for other people, though I have repurposed for myself. One thing I think of is cognitive behavioral theory, and this understanding of the interaction between our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. For me, those stand out as being some of those pillars of when I am functioning well versus when I'm not. And I'm becoming more aware of when those aren't aligned with what I need to be doing. In particular, and I think different people might have different access points. I think for some people, maybe behaviors might be easier to notice. And they mentioned physiology, so I throw that in there too. And maybe some people can notice those physical sensations before they can notice their thoughts. So they can sit with their emotions, but they don't necessarily recognize some of the things going through their head. For me, it comes in the form of usually thoughts. It comes in thoughts of being unsure of is what I'm doing helping? Is this making a difference? Am I making any sense? And when I find myself there, and I think we're all prone to some of those instances, I think when we find ourselves sitting there for a longer than normal period of time, to me, that's burnout. And what's happening cognitively over time, the way I describe it is sort of like an autopilot mode, that our brain's functioning begins to shift toward the back part of our brain, the part of our brains that's more responsible for memories, more responsible for emotions, sensory information as opposed to logical thought in the front. And I think it's a survival mechanism. It's something that we try and minimize the impact that our brain is taking from all the requests, people pushing our boundaries, from the things we have to do. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense for the brain to say, well, let's take it easy and let's do these other things, though those things usually aren't, replenishing. Those things are usually, in the long run, maybe diminishing on the other end. So for me, I keep those things in mind. I think about some of the changes in behavior I have from not wanting to do something that I used to want to do, whether that's something that's harder on the work end of things or just being at home and gardening. And on days when I don't feel like doing that, I know something's up.
You or others? What is the you?
For me and what I see and what I experience in in those times where I may have it, it's if you are speaking to me, like we're having a conversation, and my brain is just like, yeah, that's nice, right? A disengagement, right? Which is, so that's why I try not to get to that point, because I don't ever want to be disengaged from another being in the world in that sense. But it may also just come, you can experience it in ways such as, not wanting to get out of bed in the morning. Like you just be like your 3-year-old self all the time. I don't have to, I don't want to, right? And those things where I can tell you where I've experienced, like last year we moved, so the whole summer was spent moving. So my usual break time was not possible, right? Which meant I didn't have a recovery period. And also because of the political climate and the conversations and what it is that we take, and that's a very real thing in where I am in having conversations about politics or the impact of certain things in the world on campus, at people's homes, where their communities are. And at some point there is a breaking point where I'm not able to take anything else in because of the emotional nature of it. And 3 years ago, I traveled to Juba, South Sudan for 3 weeks, 1 week and then 2 weeks. But when I came back, it was difficult to adjust because of being in Juba. And so if you had seen me on any good day, and I'm really happy telling people this. So there's the other side of this, is that if you're a woman and if you're a Black woman and if you're this and you this, just fill in the blank, right? If you tell people, these things, like, oh my God, like, is she prepared to do the work? But it's a very real thing. You can't go and do so. You can go home and it can happen. And if you had seen me on any good day, I would have just been sobbing. Mm. And I cried so much in coming back. My experience was very different than my colleagues who had, a much more, different experience from having been there for so long. And so what I did is I got on the phone and I actually called one of my spiritual elders and said, hey, I can't stop crying, right? I'm going to write some poems about this eventually. And I have. It, has resulted in a full-scale manuscript exploring violence in the U.S. and in Juba, right? Called Learning to Eat the Dead, right? But that was the way to do it, right? And so it's just that stopping and crying and being angry sometimes at everything, not for any particular reason, just you're just angry, right? So yeah.
I think my experience was pretty similar to what other panelists just described. Like I mentioned that I put my project aside after I came back from my last data collection trip. I knew that my data collection was done by the time, but I just didn't want to look back. And I wasn't ready to talk about my research either, but I did the job for the center, for my job, because I had to. So those are things that not necessarily, in terms of research productivity, I wasn't producing anything at the point. And I just don't remember how I recovered from that. Maybe I realized that it's been a while. I need to go back and I just need to finish this. And then I started talking to people around me who are going through the same process. And those are, I think those are good starters to go back to my project, because when I was in that burnout stage, I wasn't even feeling guilty about saying, okay, I'm not looking at my data or whatever. Those are moments are always there. And then, I think it really was my friend, talking to my friends. Like, I met a friend who came back to Bloomington after she done her master's like 7 years ago, and she was just visiting for, I don't know, whatever, for fun. And then it was a moment that triggered, okay, you can take a break, but it's your job to wrap up the mess after like 6 months break. So I know you need a break, but you need to finish that up as soon as possible and go back to your project, because you need to finish this anyway at some point. And it's gonna be harder if you take longer break. Yeah. But I think the point is that as a grad student, you always feel like, I need to work on my project or multiple projects 24 hours, 7 days. And I see many friends who are feeling guilty about, oh, I went to volleyball games or basketball games, or I hang out with my friends like yesterday night, those kind of things. And that guilty feeling is always there, and we just don't know how to deal with those feelings, especially when we are in like coursework and have a lot of assignments to do, or if you're teaching, then you have to talk to your students, etc., etc. There are countless things that you can do, you should do to survive. Then I think it can be really challenging for grad students to take care of self and asking those important questions about yourself. Taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Time, right? So we're thinking about time as one of those oddly constructed, almost non-existent things. But when we're thinking about mentors and how we choose our mentors, like, we really advise that people have more than one type of mentor, right? Your mentor could be the person who is one of those people who serves in the way of advisor, and your advisor doesn't necessarily have to be your mentor, right? But also thinking about what your needs are. So literally the way the center was developed was asking people over a year's time. If you had walked into my office in Kirkwood, the wall behind you of windows was the size of the walls in my office. And I would ask any person who came in randomly on the street, what do you need? What do you need? Knowing that that was a very difficult question to answer, because sometimes we don't know what we need. And we certainly don't know what we need. We're in the midst of burnout or compassion fatigue or just exhaustion. But what do you need? And so people just answered that question. So we need to also think about, how is it the mentors that we have, what are the actual needs we have, and who can address those needs? Maybe we need, as a grad student, I would highly advise somebody who's your financial mentor, right? Maybe you need someone who can ask you questions about your emotional health. Maybe you need someone who's not going to ask you any questions, but say, hey, do you want to go to see a movie? Because they recognize certain signs, right? And so thinking about that, and then also thinking about time, this thing about time, how do we manage our time? In a 24-hour period, where do we put sleep? Where do we put family? You know, the Covey principle, right? You know, the big things go in first, right? What are the big things in your life that are necessary, right? So the big thing in my life is my husband. Everybody on campus who knows me knows that, right? Is my husband, because that is the person, when I was working on my PhD, who cooked and cleaned and came and traveled another country and came to the US, you know, for me, moved 2 cities so that I could do this PhD, right? So my time, in terms of boundaries, are very clear, because without that support, and without the support of the women in my life who supported me, I wouldn't be able to do this. what are the big things? And the questions that I often ask students is, how do you define love? When somebody asks, like, how do you thrive, particularly as an underrepresented student, you know, how do you thrive, right? But how do you thrive at any place? My first question is, how do you define love? What do you need to see every day? Who do you need to have in your life every day? How far do you want to be away from the people and things that you want to see every day? They seem like just really simple, irrelevant questions, right? But on a day-to-day basis, it's like, who can you reach to when you feel yourself, I'm like tripping and stumbling over a limb and you see the hole coming, right? And so structuring time, and then also becoming unafraid. And again, this takes community and practice to say no. As we'll say, no is a complete sentence. In any language, it is a complete sentence.
That's amazing.
Right? How to learn how to say no, but not just no. Sometimes it's no and, no however, no at this moment, but right? And so learning how to structure those things to not close down any opportunities, but to also take care of and protect yourself, right? And also not being afraid to move things. As a performing poet, one year I was out every day of the week in Chicago. And one day I looked at my calendar and realized after my full-time job, I was out performing every night or listening to friends. And so what I did, first 3 things I took. And then I called everybody else after the first 3 things on that calendar, unless it was a paid gig and I already had a contract, and said, I'm so sorry, but my schedule is full and I'm overwhelmed with them and I'm not able to do this. I'm happy to reschedule, but I can't do it this week. And you'd be surprised. Some people will be unhappy, but you'd be surprised how many people like, oh, okay, I really appreciate you, because the option then is show up tired and exhausted and angry and not fully present. Right? And our goal is to be fully present in whatever it is that we are participating in.
Thank you for bringing us and making us all present at this moment. I really appreciate that. I think we should just open it up to some conversation amongst you. I also want to encourage people to this is an informal conversation. Please help yourself to more food. If you want a second round or a third round, please, it's all there for you.
Yeah.
So any questions, comments?
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you for, I mean, we all know what is different for everybody, burnout, right? But I wanted to ask you, from the other students, we always have the grad students while certain work done actually. Well, a good dissertation is a done dissertation, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think some of the panelists mentioned the timing of it. So we are expected to do a lot, and the dissertation becomes, I'll do that tomorrow. Tomorrow never ends, and then you don't have funding, and then you stay more than you're supposed to. So all you have to do well. It depends on the department. But what do you make of that? So are you always burned out until you're done with the dissertation, and then what? You're like, okay, I'm done. So I feel like you have to have a motivation. Like if you have a job, you write the dissertation in a month. And again, it comes to a thing of a good dissertation is a done dissertation. Do you agree with that?
I feel like we should pick on you, yeah.
But I didn't finish my dissertation.
But you're in it. You're in it right now.
Well, I've heard of that phrase a lot of times. Dissertation is a done dissertation. I agree with that. I mean, but in terms of motivation, like securing a job before you finish your dissertation, that's another homework that you have to do when you're writing your dissertation or teaching or working for your funding. Like you're going to prepare your materials and going through all those interviews and job continuing process. And I saw a lot of friends who had to put aside their dissertation or their research because of those work. Many of them told me that they just couldn't do those particular things at one time. So I'm still struggling, but as a person who's in the same stage, I really don't know. I don't think I can provide a concrete answer to your question. But my motivation is I need to finish. I need to get out of here.
And
I've
how do
been
you
here
do
for
that?
6 years. My friends are living. Those are good motivations too.
I have a million thoughts, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll talk most recently last, so you go and I'll talk after you.
I like the idea of a dissertation being done. I don't like the idea of being that's the only good one. And I feel like what it does is it turns this into a pass-fail. And the only time I pass is when it's done. And when we're talking about being contemplative and being in the practice, now what easier way to remove ourselves from being contemplative and enjoying the process as much as we can than saying it's not good until it's done. And you think of any sort of transformation, whether it be educational, whether it be physical, no one goes into the gym knowing like if I lift weights today, I'm gonna walk out buff. There's gonna be a process. And I think when we step away from that process and we only look for the outcomes, we can really fall down a path of, well, today I didn't get what I wanted, as opposed to today I did knock out what I intended to do. And I think back to that, you're mentioning boundaries, Marianne, like the importance of having to make time for those things that are important to us and sometimes ruling out the things that are less. One thing I've sort of taken to, and this is bringing back some old sports psychology stuff from when I was a lot younger, is considering this idea of from a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being as involved as you can be, and 0 to just being completely dismissive, where it works for me in a particular field. Maybe for a dissertation, I need to be at a 6 over the course of a month. That needs to be my level of engagement, and maybe sometimes higher or lower. For my job, does my level of engagement, is that best at a 5 and I can make time for myself, but still attend to the things I need to, and evaluating that at the end of a month or at the end of a week to say, did I meet those needs? And if not, what are some of the changes I need to make? Those boundaries I need to consider. So maybe there's something that, in terms of importance, is maybe a 2 and doesn't require an 8 in terms of my involvement. Maybe I can be more proportional with that.
I was going to suggest this. I love this panel and the being a 2. So I want us to think about language. A good dissertation is a done dissertation, right? I was thinking in terms of it's good to have the dissertation done, right? And rethinking the values that we put, that's a good dissertation, right? Just in line with what you're saying. And so I think if you are experiencing burnout, anyone in the process of writing the dissertation now is the time, there's several steps. Just one, to acknowledge that, to acknowledge what is happening as part of that. How is it affecting your sleep, your eating, your interactions with other people, your interactions with yourself? Are you able to take care of yourself, right? I'm one of the first to say, if you need help, I will walk you to CAPS, right? I will walk you wherever it is that you need to do. So acknowledging it and then determining what is important. And I think it also helps to speak with your advisor and your mentor, if possible. Being fully aware that not everyone necessarily has an advisor or a mentor with whom they can speak about these things, right? That this is a real thing. So in that case, then you want to think about the people who are available to you, who could be mentors with whom you could speak, whether they are here or not. Again, right? So it's a real thing. My mentors, while I was working on my doctorate, were here, but they were also outside. They were members of my master's thesis, right? And so thinking about what those things look like and where you can take a break and where you find the person with whom you can speak. Sometimes it means readjusting our expectations of what can be done, right? And that is also a real thing, and thinking through the consequences of that, so that if you shift your completion to another semester, for example, does that impact how you go and when you go on the job market? Yes, it very well may be. However, you may also find that in some cases, if you ask the question of a job, it may say ABD, candidates would be considered. And there are all types of ways with talking to a mentor who can help you think about how to negotiate the position you may want, or a position that you're looking at when you feel that some things are not as favorable for you, right? So what happens with the burnout, what happens with the exhaustion is that I don't have any other options. I can't do this, I have to do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we want you to do is to literally breathe. And so here's an exercise that I do with my students. It's usually around slavery and tension and racial violence, but it actually applies to our daily lives. So if you take a moment and you just clench everything, everybody just try this, right? And you just hold your breath. You just hold your breath. And so if you continue to do this, usually what I'll say to people is this is what it feels like, all the time for a series of centuries of being Black in the world, right? This is how you are. But the reality is for graduate students, right, and I'm not into comparative traumas or anything like that, the reality is that when you are under stress and when you are exhausted and when you are burnout, this is how you feel, that you cannot breathe and everybody is going along their regular life. So what we invite you to do is to take a moment to breathe. Because the reality is if you stop, right, and when you stop, and if you've been that tense for so long, you often get sick. Because every toxin that's been holed up in your body because you've been like this, I got to get it done, I can't see, right? It all of a sudden says, ooh, look, we got free play, we can go. And then you have whatever it is that you have, right? That's the reality of that. So what we invite you to do is to literally breathe and learn how to begin breathing. All you can do is ask the question of your cohort, your mentors in particular, is there another way that I can look at this? Can I reevaluate this? Can I restructure this?
Can I actually jump on the same question? So my name is Jess Alana. I'm a graduate assistant for the Center for the Study of Global Change. And I recently turned in my dissertation to my committee. Yeah! But having said that, it's never done, it's in and they have it. You have a paper copy in your office somewhere. I hope you found it. Yay! That surprise, Dr. Khan is on my committee. Anyway, that document, I printed it out and I turned it in, but I know I'm gonna have to go through revisions. And I know that after I'm done with it, I'm gonna probably try and turn it in a bunch of different articles. So it's gonna morph yet again. It's never really done. So while for some people that might produce a lot of anxiety, I get the it's good, get it done kind of thing. A good one is a done one. But it's always morphing and shifting into what you need it to be. So why obsess on that point? Which brings me to time management. The reason that I specifically was hey, you young, jump in on this one. She and I have for the past 2 years, good Lord, it's been 2 years. Sorry, have gone to a writing group every Wednesday from 2 to 5. Sometimes it was even 1 to 5 over the summer, every Wednesday for 2 years. And that's the only reason that this dissertation got done, hands down. Because when I was there, I was writing, I was transcribing. I did not do anything but my dissertation for that 2 to 5 every Wednesday. And when I was home, I was home. I got to be home. I got to sit and watch a television show once a week. It was so nice. I saw my significant other, my partner. It was nice because I had that allotted time. So time management is huge. And towards the end, you young and I were like, I don't know if I'm ever getting out. Let's do Tuesdays also. So for the past, was it semester? The past semester. She has 3 writing groups, people. That's incredible. How do you do that? Anyway, So it's never done, but if you allot time to get it done, it will in some fashion get done. So I'll leave questioning out. I also have a question, but I'll let it slide for now. Sway?
Yeah, thank you all for the information. So I'm a second year PhD student in gender studies. So I'm in the earlier stage. So the title is called Post-Fieldwork, but I want to draw us to a little like time frame wise, a little bit earlier to fieldwork, because speaking as a person who is going to do fieldwork in 2 weeks, going back home as an international student and native ethnographer, going back to fieldwork always means like moving between locations, traveling between locations. Sometimes just means dislocating. Sometimes it means displacement. You have to, I don't know. I can anticipate there's a lot of like confusions of time and space. I'm curious about like how, I want to hear more about the discussion on fieldwork. I have a specific question, is that what would you have done differently in fieldwork for a person who is going to do fieldwork? Like what would you done differently, or some things to expect? Tips for a person who's going to do fieldwork?
Such a good question.
Well, I'll say someone who never did field work, my answer will half apply. In that I would consider definitely some of the things you're talking about, like, that idea of a totem. What is a routine I might have? What is something that I can rely on, that at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, that I can count will be there? That is a means of grounding myself, and it's away from, what it is that I'm working on. Because I think we can begin to sort of almost overlap the two when it comes to our work, and especially when we're starting. And I think a little bit about my work. My work, I didn't do any research per se, but the second year of my graduate program is practicum, and I start meeting students for the first time, and it's something that you start thinking about all the time, and you leave and you keep thinking about it, and you go home and you want to talk to people about it, but you can't because you're bound by confidentiality, so I really can't do that. And then the next time I get to talk about it is when I'm back at work, when I'm still thinking about it. And I think now about how nice it would have been to have something that I could have relied on, whether it be a person or an activity or just a way of engaging myself that wasn't that. And it wasn't something until I found much later on that, spending time with friends and going to play pool helps. And so it's no mistake that I ended up playing volleyball again. That was very intentional, because I know time with friends doing something physical takes my mind off things and puts me in a very different space. So I consider that, and because I haven't made the plug yet, I will also say, if you are here working on your dissertation, or just working in general, we do offer, you mentioned contemplative practices, we do offer mindfulness meditations literally every day at CAPS, along with the dissertation support group. So that's always available to students as well.
Over the summer?
Yeah,
Woo!
That's good.
Paul's my supervisor. Paul runs it, so
That's amazing.
I'm glad I know.
That's good, because we don't do over the summer, but we do once a week. Now I know there are lots of different places on campus on Fridays, and we do have just a small writing group on Wednesday evenings from 5:30 to 7:30 for people to just come in and write. Third writing group. What I think I would have done differently with field work in the first case, in terms of working in Brazil, I probably would have come up with multiple plans, like a plan like C or something, because it was the case that although I had spent 2 years preparing to do the work with the community where I was working, when I got there for various and sundry reasons, that community decided they didn't want to meet with me at all. And so I had an alternative. I was able to create an alternative on the ground by the group of people who did decide that they wanted to meet with me, but it really impacted the work, and it was a large, but for various and sundry reasons, they just literally decided they did not want to talk. And so having that ahead of time, if I had even imagined that, I would have had a formal B and C and changed the project in a way, but I was able to do it on the ground. But definitely having some what ifs worked out.
Yikes. That's horrifying.
I agree with that, because it's full of unexpected surprises. Some are pleasant, but not all of them. And sometimes you need to make very important methodological decisions to modify your research plan and even research design or research questions when you're in the field. So I think it's always good to have a plan B or even plan C. And another thing I could recommend is to take your time to reflect on your data after you talk to your participants or spend some time at the setting. And you can just jot down your feelings or how it went through and reflect on those kind of things. I attended the last session about doing field work and working with critical or vulnerable participants for research purposes at the center. And I realized that more and more research and academia, we are paying attention to the process and taking care of researchers' self-care, how they are dealing with those emotions and feelings when they're working in very critical settings sometimes. And the relationship with your participants can be very dynamic. Even though you know them pretty well for a long time, you never know what will happen.
So I'd like to say that if you're, even with all of our digital capability, to a good notebook and carrying that notebook at all times is really important in being able to take notes and to do that reflection. That was helpful for me because none of the people I interviewed spoke English. So I'm doing the transcription, but I'm also doing my own notes in Portuguese and reflecting on them. But because technology changes so quickly, right? The program that I was using here, by the time I get ready to do so many different things, even if I've downloaded, uploaded someplace, but just the hand notes and the pending, this is for anybody, you all know this, some people may be more comfortable with the handwriting than,
Well, we have a couple minutes left, and unless there's any burning questions from the audience, I know just Lana, you might have even had one more, but the other possibility is, last closing remarks, specific recommendations.
Something happy.
Something happy.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think, it's interesting for you to say. I mean, this is the one thing I just wanted to add before we go back to this is this issue of burnout or whatever you call it. I think you're right. Stress and burnout. This is it's a lifetime struggle, and so it's something that for you to kind of come up with good techniques and ways and to ways to sort of check yourself. And I think that's a lot. You're not going to avoid it. It's hard not to fall into that hole as much as you try. And it's good, but try not to. But you most likely will. At some point. Yeah, you will. But just to know when you're in it. I think that's just such a key skill. Know when you're in it, and that will help you get yourself and figure out what to do. But I just want to say that it's this is something to continue. So
to not be ashamed when you're in it, because I think there's a lot of shame around that. It's to not be ashamed. We are human beings, right? And there are lots of things that happen to us as part of being human beings and how we process, how we integrate, information or don't integrate information. And it's just really important, and it's hard. So saying these things doesn't mean that they're necessarily easy to do, but to, not be ashamed or to find ways to work with people so that we're not ashamed or that we're feeling less than because we did not do X at 2:00. But you got it done at 2:15. Right? Right. So those kinds of things. Something positive?
sure.
Dance. Dance. Like no lie. I think the world would be. I'm only interested in two things: liberation and joy for all beings on the planet.
I love that.
That's it. Dance. Sometimes we dance in our office, and it's just important. Like dance. Like. And laugh. Yes.
maybe one last thing I want to mention is going back to this comment about paying attention to process. Whenever I experienced that, I started looking at my data, and when you're listening to or transcribing, you see very interesting moments that brings you some joy. Okay, I can do something with this data. I have something to talk about. And also like thinking about the very first reason that made you do this study. So thinking about those foundational things are really helpful. Like, why did I start? Or even why did I decide to do this research with this particular people, like for what? And what I want to do with this data. As Solana mentioned, it's not a done dissertation. We will working on this project for multiple years, even after our graduation.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something positive.
I don't know if I have anything positive, but I will say I do have a note for the skeptics, and I say that meaning I am a very skeptical person. I've always has been my whole life. And you name it, I don't believe it. And I think sometimes when it comes to self-care, when it comes to structure, when it comes to boundaries, when it comes to routine, when it comes to mindfulness, it can be easy to dismiss them because here's why. Why would something like that change this feeling that I'm having? And to those people, I'd say what an old friend always reminded me, don't knock it till you try it. Not only because it's worth trying and worth exploring and learning about yourself, but also because for those of you who might feel more science inclined as opposed to feeling like this is sort of like you were saying floofy, and I think sometimes when I talk with somebody, I ask them, does that sound a little floofy to you? And let me know if it does. That there is some very real science going on. There we are re-engaging the front part of our brains, our prefrontal cortex. We are generating new connections. This will not happen overnight. Rome was not built in a day. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't turn into Mr. Olympia one day and then he was done working out. Still watches Instagram, still works out.
It's incredible.
It is a process. And in order to maintain that, we need to enjoy that process. We need to find something that leads us to that process. And sometimes processes are less enjoyable. Let's find the easiest way in. And starting there.
I want to thank all of you. It's really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.